Hi, I am Christine Chandler. I am the state representative for Los Alamos County. I also have parts of Sandoval County, the area around Jemez Springs, that area there, and parts of Santa Fe County. The south end, known as La Cienega, that area, and kind of in the airport area. So that's my current district. I used to have Rio Arriba, a little piece of Rio Arriba, which I enjoyed very much because I think it's good to have kind of sort of different perspectives that you need to understand. And it was a good educational experience for me to work with folks in Rio Arriba, understand their challenges. Rural communities have different perspectives than we in Los Alamos do. I think of us, even though we're a small community, I think of us with sort of an urban mentality, and a lot of the issues that we face are more, I think, in line with what our urban colleagues face. But very much enjoy representing all of you. I have lived in this town since 1994, so I've been here for a long time. I have held elected office on the local level. I was a county councilor for a period of time. I also worked at the laboratory as an attorney for 27-ish years, so familiar with the major employer in town, familiar with a lot of the local issues. So I hope that I'm doing a reasonable job of representing all of you. I think I have a pretty good handle on what your issues are, our issues are, and very much appreciate working with you. I, if you don't know, am the chair of the House Judiciary Committee. I've held that position now for about 3 years. Prior to that, I was the chair of the House Taxation and Revenue Committee, have served on House Taxation and Revenue since I was elected in 2019 is when I started representing folks in the state. So very interested in tax policy and would love to talk with you about it and some of my concerns and frustrations moving forward in terms of how we should be thinking about taxes and long-term policy issues. Not reactive, but sort of focused on trying to plan forward. So in my role as House Judiciary, I hear a lot of bills. And I asked my assistant, and yes, I have an assistant now. That's a great thing. For the longest time, we had no staff throughout the year. And just last year, we initiated some rules, and we are now funding staff for members. So I have a full-time assistant, and I asked her, okay, check on how many bills House Judiciary received in terms of referrals this year. 384 bills were referred to House Judiciary. And my colleagues, and so let's talk about health. I wanted to give you some perspective in terms of what does it relate to in terms of what other committees. They had 155 bills, and they were working a lot. So just want to give you a frame of reference in terms of kind of the workload that House Judiciary has. Tax is, an interesting and challenging committee, but it doesn't have as many bills either because, how many tax policy bills can you file in a year? Not that many. But in terms of House Judiciary, we have a very heavy workload. My focus throughout my career in the House has been on a couple of areas. I'm very interested in labor and employment law that in part derives from the fact that I practice in that arena. So I think I have a good handle on what it's all about. And also one of my colleagues said to me the other day, she said, I've always thought of you as somebody who looks out for the little guy, and that is how I perceive myself. Are we helping people who are not as advantaged as we are? Are we working for ways to give them the tools to be able to have some of the advantages that we have? That is an area that I'm very interested in. So that certainly derives from employment. Health policy, certainly ensuring that people have access to health care is important. Labor obviously is a very important policy initiative, and as many of you may know, I've been working on paid family and medical leave for several years now, which again, I agree, I view as something that is intended to support working families primarily. Most of us, at least when I was working, had access to very strong benefit programs. That is not the case universally in this state, and I believe it's one of our roles is to provide ways to support people who are having families or who may face the challenges of, a serious medical incident or issue, and that's what paid family medical leave does. So stepping back a little bit now and just a little bit of an overview, I usually start these discussions with what's going on with our budget. We continue to have strong revenues, although we acknowledge, I think, and are aware that the projections on oil and gas are starting to slow down and taper off in terms of strength. And so we are, of course, planning for that. We maintain a 30% reserve in our budget, and we do that, which is a very healthy reserve rate for a government. And we do that because we recognize the volatility that's associated with our revenue stream. We rely significantly on oil and gas. We know that's an issue, and we've been planning for it in multiple ways, including developing very strong reserves from many perspectives, so that when there is a unexpected revenue drop, or maybe even an expected revenue drop, we have the ability to rely on revenues. We have something called the Rainy Day Fund, which was created, 20-some years ago, and that's a fund that's when their revenues are very high, we start putting money into it. And we have various formulas. We have something called the Early Childhood Fund, and I'm not talking about the permanent fund, the land grant permanent fund, which is also an early childhood fund from which we draw monies to support early childhood initiatives. We created a fund about 5 or 6 years ago that also expands as our revenues expands, and is currently at about $11 or $12 billion from which we can draw, and it is the creature of the legislature that allows us to be able to draw on that money. So we have some flexibility, and I'm bringing that up because it will fold into my brief discussion on what's going on with paid family and medical leave. So this year we planned for a 6% increase in spending in our budget, and 4% raises for state employees, average raises for state employees and teachers, educational employees. We've been working very hard to bring up salaries for teachers, and we started a few years ago doing that, and we've become very competitive. And this year we added $5,000 to each pay grade for teachers again. So we recognize to get strong teachers, we need to be competitive in the region so that we can recruit teachers, and we have been doing that, and the chair of our education committee is very much committed to doing that. Every year we have a tax package, although this year I question whether we need to have a tax package every year. And tax package usually means tax cuts in some way, or some kind of tax credit program or whatnot. This year we expanded our working families tax credit, and we've renamed it the Earned Income Tax Credit, and made it more advantageous, I guess you might say, to residents, so that individuals who are earning $40,000 or less will pay virtually nothing in taxes, which I think is a great boon to all of us, and I'm very proud of the work we've been doing in that arena. The tax package, to my knowledge, has not been signed yet by the governor. And there are a couple reasons maybe why she's looking at it closely. The House, when we put together the tax package, had a way of what I would refer to as paying for it. All right, so remember, when you give a tax break to someone, you're basically spending money. that you would otherwise have. It's an expenditure, and that's how we refer to it. It's a tax expenditure when we give a tax credit, a tax deduction, some sort of tax break. So we want to pay for that. Well, how do you pay for that? Well, finding revenues from other sources. And this year, our proposal was to increase the severance tax a little bit on oil, and lower the tax on gas a little bit. But the net was an increase in revenues from those sources. That would have paid for the earned income tax credit, and it also left some money, revenue stream for the Senate to plan for, because the way we create a tax package normally is the House initiates it, but the Senate then either supplements it or I guess potentially could even cut it. That rarely happens. Usually tax expenditures are added, and we try to balance it out so that we have some way of what we call paying for the tax cuts that we're proposing. This year, we proposed that, but the Senate pulled out the increases on oil that we were proposing that would have helped pay for the tax package. So I'm not sure where the governor is going to come out on that, but it is something that I expressed some concern on the floor of the House when we were talking about the tax package. And frankly, we've done a lot in terms of tax policy and tax cuts these last several years, including, we cut taxes on 75% of New Mexicans, I think, in my first 2 years in office. So we've been continuing to do that, focusing on trying to make our income tax system more progressive. And I would point out over, not this year, but in past years, we have cut the GRT. I would have liked to seen it cut more, and I'm disappointed that there hasn't been greater effort to do that, because I think there's an opportunity for us to cut the GRT more. It's significant when you cut GRT. I'm talking just about the state portion of GRT, not county. Obviously, we don't have control over that, nor do I think we should. But there was a lot of work on property taxes this year, which I find somewhat concerning. In the state legislature, it's easy to look to property taxes, and I'm looking at our county manager here, because we receive very little revenue. The state does not rely on property taxes to support its programs. The local governments do. So it's easy to be, on the state level, to look for ways to cut property taxes, since there is virtually no financial impact. But it does have a significant impact on local governments. And I, as someone who comes from a local government background, and there are others in the legislature, are very mindful of the fact that to raid the local governments, is an easy thing to do, but I think we need to be very prudent in how we go about doing that, because it's frankly not fair. There are very small communities who have almost no GRT tax base, but do have to rely much more on the property tax to help support their operations. So that's a cautionary note that I think we need to be really alert to. I'll just talk a little bit about what I worked on, and I'm happy to entertain questions at, kind of at the conclusion of my presentation. Again this year, let me start with the public safety package. I am the chair, last year I was the chair of Courts, Corrections, and Justice. And that committee is the one that obviously is going to be the one most focused on public safety and a whole litany of other things that involves the application of law and, policy. And as you know, the governor was very assertive in her belief that we needed to be focused on criminal competency statute, which has not, in fairness, been touched probably for about 40 or 50 years. So it definitely needed to be updated, and there were issues associated with it, frustrating law enforcement in many ways, and community leaders, and where there are relatively high populations of people who have mental illness or mental, issues that are then involved in the criminal justice system, where they may be small level crimes or they may be serious crimes, but we need to have a way to address that that concern. And I was asked, as the chair of both the House Judiciary Committee and Courts, Corrections, and Justice, to take on the issue of trying to come up with a proposal that we could all get around in terms of criminal competency and other associated issues where mental illness in an individual intersects with the criminal justice system. And for someone who practiced at the laboratory for a lengthy period of time, that was a challenge, although frankly it was a challenge for all the criminal lawyers that were involved in this case. But we put a lot of effort into that over the last summer, and we did come up with a proposal that I think people are widely happy with. The governor, who was driving the initiative, was pleased with what we came up with in terms of a proposal. The Senate was on board with the proposal that we came up with, and obviously I, as chair of the committee, and my colleagues were pleased with where we went with that. So very challenging initiative, and there was a lot of work involved, and I got a lot of support from staff and judges, and I did a lot of work in terms of talking with stakeholders across the state, some of whom have programs in place that divert individuals who may have a mental illness, or don't divert individuals who have been engaged in a serious crime but have a mental illness. But I think it's a fair balance, and I'm looking forward to see how it plays out. And I think we just need to watch how it works, and if we need to adjust some, we'll adjust some. This is, law is not written in stone generally, unless you're talking about the Constitution, and that's practically written in stone. So we'll be looking at ways to improve as we go forward, and a lot of that is going to involve funding the courts better, funding our mental health care, providers better, providing ways to provide facilities across the state, and we did that this year. The Senate Bill 3, I think, is the program that we have put in place to enhance funding in the mental health arena. We budgeted this year over $100 million directed at behavioral health initiatives. We need to do both at the same time. We need to support people who have mental health issues, and certainly we need to address any associated criminal activity that is, the result of some of these things. So I feel that we did very well in our first 30 days in the session, where we had committed to come up with a public safety package. I'm proud of the work I've done on that, and I'm proud of the work that the legislature has collectively done on public safety and mental health. We recognize, and behavioral health, we recognize it's something we have to continue to work on. It's not going to be an easy fix, and it's going to take years, really, probably, until we see the fruits of what we are trying to do. But I'm pleased that there was a collective interest in doing so with the legislature and the governor's office. The second 30 days was more of a challenge. While I was working on the public safety package, which we had committed to getting done within 30 days and did do, I was also negotiating changes in on paid family and medical leave. So let's step back and remember what that's involved. What it is a program that is paid for, at least initially would have been paid for by premiums on wages that the employers pay and the employee pays, all right? And it started out these last few years as a program that was solely funded that way. This year, in listening to the business community and other stakeholders and my colleagues, we said, okay, what can we do that's different, that makes it more that will garner more support in the House. The House of Representatives has been kind of the sticking point in getting paid family medical leave through. So in working with the Speaker's office and some of my colleagues, we came up with a modified program that we call Welcome Child Family Wellness Plan. And it's very unique to New Mexico. It follows some of the programs that are in place in other states, but it also is different. The state, using the early childhood funds, which I just pointed out are at about $11 or $12 billion, would have been able to support what we were calling a rebate or a stipend for families who are having children either through birth or adoption. And we would have, if the stipend would have been $3,000 a month for 3 months. Okay, so that's a total of $9,000 that a new family would get after they had a child. Then there would be the separate program, which is more of a medical program, wherein someone would be eligible for 6 weeks of wage replacement, partial wage replacement, much like a short-term disability policy that maybe some of you have, wherein if you qualify, you have a serious medical illness or some other things, you would be eligible for up to 6 weeks of wage replacement, up to $55,000 or so. That's the state's median wage, okay? A modified program this is a modified program from what we had suggested initially over these last several years, listening to what people were concerned about. Some of the concerns that I would hear is the state has no skin in the game. Where's the state's participation in this? Well, now the state has skin in the game. We want to support people who are having children, and assist them financially in absorbing those additional costs. It could be used potentially for childcare, or it could be used simply to help support yourself while you're bonding with your child. You would have options in how you use the money. It's very hard to find child care for infants, as I'm sure many of you know. So that all went very well until we hit Senate Finance. And there seemed to be resistance from that committee on a couple of fronts. One is, and I felt a little bit whipsawed, because there were people who wanted the length from 6 weeks to be 9 weeks. And actually, they really wanted it at 12 weeks, but they were suggesting 9 weeks as the median point. So that was a sticking point for some members, it appears. The other piece was the state's participation in the welcome child piece, which seemed to be an issue for some. And I believe even the governor's office, although they weren't explicitly opposed to the bill, they weren't explicitly in favor of it. So, more work needs to be done. We'll continue to work it. But, the state does have resources in the early childhood area now. There was a long period of time where we underfunded early childhood, and, we need to acknowledge that. But we are at a place now where we are very strong financially with the combination of the permanent fund that's in place, where we draw annually, and this other fund that we created about 5 years ago that is at a level that we had never anticipated. It was always thought that it would hover around $1 billion, and in fact, it is now at $12 billion. We're very good we've been very good. I just want to say, give us in the legislature and the governor credit for planning forward with the strong revenues that we have from oil and gas, and having all these kinds of provisions that will hedge when it is, when the market weakens. And I'd point out, given the financial stuff that's going on the federal level, our oil's dropping. The value, I was talking to somebody, I think it's $67 a barrel yesterday.
56 Brent crude.
Oh, really? Yeah. 56. Well, and that's a reflection of kind of the erratic policies that are happening on the federal level. And that is gonna, I think a call to concern should be, we are gonna be affected eventually with what's going on federally. Oil is being impacted. We are facing very large unemployment. I cannot imagine a world where tens of thousands of people are being laid off and we're going to continue to have a strong economy. Unemployed people do not spend money. They and actually sometimes draw on money from state agencies at a certain point. So we should be very concerned about what's happening federally. Right now, we're in reasonably good shape, but we need to be sounding the alarm. We rely heavily on Medicaid, And if there are changes to federal Medicaid programs, that will impact us financially as well. So be alert to what's happening federally. We are committed to supporting the citizens of New Mexico, but it's going to be harder and harder to do as the economic situation on a federal level starts to evolve, or in my opinion, devolve. Paid family medical is something, public safety package is something I worked on. An issue that I'm going to be working on going forward is privacy and AI, artificial intelligence. And I had a bill this year. I signed on to a privacy bill that I think we all need to be focused on as well. And what does that mean? That means when you access stuff electronically primarily, what kind of data is being collected about you? What are the settings what's the default setting when you go to a website? Should it be at maximum privacy or not? How is that data being used? Should they be able to track you and then sell that information or otherwise transfer it to other entities? That is what is happening. And it is not being addressed on a federal level. And it should be, frankly, but since it is not, members, legislators such as myself are beginning to focus on trying to address it on the state level. So that's one bill that's out there. There are privacy bills that were filed this year. I was on one of them. And the other bill that I filed this year was an effort to get our arms around algorithmic discrimination. And we need a better phrase for that, because I think that puts people off and they have no idea what you're talking about, as my husband pointed out to me when I was talking about this. AI is being used, and it's predictive AI, not generative. Okay, so you have to separate out what we're talking about. Predictive AI is being used now by organizations to screen you. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you apply for a job, AI may be the first thing that decides whether or not your application makes it to the next level. If there is a next level, in theory, AI could do all of the screening. I don't think it's gotten quite yet to that place, but nonetheless, it's being used to screen you for job applications, housing opportunities, mortgage, finance, insurance. There's a litany of things that it is being used for and can be used for. And the question is, are those algorithms being monitored in such a way that the user has a relatively high level of confidence that it's fair, okay? That discriminatory factors or factors that are not relevant to the particular, decision are not being, largely relied on. And we have no way of knowing whether that's happening or not. And the bill that I filed, and there are a few states now that are pursuing this, there's a duty on the developer to validate the information, and there's a duty on the entity that's using it. We're calling that entity a deployer, to validate the information and ensure themselves, to the best of their ability, that it does not have these underlying problems that could then affect you, frankly, going forward in a very significant way when you're thinking about employment. It also had some other things, like letting the person who's applying online, because that's how it's all done these days, know whether or not AI is being used. So, notices, those kinds of things. The ability to appeal. If, it's kind of like a credit report, you get your credit data and you can say, no, that's not right. I don't even have American Express credit card. Why are they saying I'm overdue or whatever? The ability to correct any bad information that's in the system that may have had an impact on you. So that was a bill that I had this year. We made it to the floor, so that means I made it through 2 committees, which I view as a success. It's a complicated and technical bill. And the problem with complicated and technical bills is people freeze. And not only that, they are subject to misinformation. So what happens? AI, guess what? That's Google, that's Meta, that's Amazon. There's a trade organization called TechNet, which has all of these companies involved. They all oppose bills like this. All. And the moment they saw the bill getting traction, they were on the floor of the House, frankly, I think spreading a lot of incorrect information about what the bill does. Because it's easy to do when you have a bill that's very technical. And I guess in terms of, as a legislator, I find that very frustrating. But it is a reality that we need to be able to address and educate. And this was for our first shot at this kind of thing. But I think there is growing interest on the state level to get our arms around how the potential misuses, and I'm not trying to slam AI. I think it's an important tool going forward, but I think we do need to start develop some confidence levels in these systems, and when they are impacting people's lives in a significant way and potentially negative, we need to have an understanding about how it's being used and regulate it. So that's been kind of where my focus is and was this session. And it was a very interesting experience. I met a lot of people nationally who are working on these issues, so hopefully, we can all team and learn and educate and share information. There's a big fight going on in Colorado right now over a bill that's very much like the one that I filed, so we'll see how that plays out. But the tech companies are there, and they are attempting to minimize any impacts on their ability to, frankly, do what they want to do without controls. That is kind of what I put on my list of things to talk about, but I'm happy to answer questions about bills that passed or didn't pass if I know, and where we're moving and so on. There were some good things that happened this session that I'm happy to discuss with any and all of you. So, questions? Yes?
I saw that Senate Bill 169 and Senate Bill 170, the site readiness legislation, it passed and was signed by the governor.
Right.
I did some research into the process for the site readiness selection, and from what I've been told, the Economic Development Department is going to form a committee and decides who has access to this funding for site readiness. And so I don't really have a question, but I have an ask. I would love for some outreach to happen to ensure there's equitable distribution of this funding, especially to the rural communities. I looked at the economic development plan for the state, and there's already some previously selected sites, and the only one in our region is Taos County on that list. So I'm really concerned that all this funding is going to go to the metropolitan areas and we're going to be left out of the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very valid concern, and I think it's one that should always be kind of on our forefront when we do these sort of general funding mechanisms. The one thing that I would note is legislators are pretty diligent about making sure that their districts get their share of things. So certainly that's an issue, but I take your point, and I think truly even, I shouldn't say even, I'm certain that the Economic Development Department is very aware of the need to support rural communities in this regard. And if they don't, they also know that they will be hearing from people about that, for sure. Yes, Sandy?
Yes, I have basically two questions. One, has there been any progress on getting compensation for our state legislators? And I forgot the second. So.
Okay. I would say very little progress. There was an effort this year. It always gets through the House. It gets through the House, and there was a plan to have a salary commission so that we're not people get all excited if they actually think we're going to set our own salaries and that kind of thing. But then it hits the Senate, and it has died these last several years, unfortunately. And I can't account for the rationale.
I did think of my second
Okay,
question.
shoot.
Before session, there had been talk of some legislators wanting to repeal the anti-donation clause. Did that go anywhere during session?
There was an effort to get, there was a bill drafted. There were defects found, truthfully, defects found in the bill, and we need to go back to the drawing board, and a couple of us decide. Part of the problem was, and this is not a slam against the advocates, but they were doing a lot of the work, and I think didn't have a realistic idea about how to implement. And I think the legislators, and I count myself in that category, need to have a more hands-on approach to how it might work, because there's just certain realities that you have to deal with. So I think there were defects that were identified after the bill was filed, truthfully, and so we kind of shelved that, and there's been some talk amongst some of us about how we need to be more engaged in moving forward. Well, there's my buddy, my friend, Senator Jaramillo. Yay. Well, my colleague has a day job, so I think we need to be appreciative of his ability to make it at all. Yeah.
Good to see you.
You want to take the floor, please?
Thank you, and it's so good to see everyone again, and I'm going to be reading off of a paper, which I typically don't do. I've been asked to present across at the other theater, and so I'm going to do this and then have to rush off because we do have a new employee orientation where I'll be welcoming new employees to the laboratory on behalf of the Associate Laboratory Director, who's at a retreat today. But I rushed to make sure I could get in here first. And I want to thank my assistant, Brianna, who is ready to read a statement for me on my behalf. Bill, thanks for the email. I owe you a response. And so, that was walking fast. So I'm pleased to provide you with the wrap-up of the 2025 New Mexico legislative session. My colleagues and I passed meaningful legislation to keep our streets and families safe, provide more comprehensive and equitable health care, bring focused attention to the most vulnerable of our state, protect the environment in the wake of climate change and the changing federal landscape, to ensure that all New Mexicans are treated with the respect and dignity they deserve, and bring more transparency into government. Now, Representative Chandler might have already told you this, but of the 1,328 measures introduced, 247 pieces of legislation made it to the legislative finish line, and that was 195 bills, 51 memorials, and 1 joint resolution. Now tomorrow, which is April 11th, is the deadline for the governor to sign off on any legislation that made it to her desk. So we're in those final days of getting legislation signed into law. Now, I'm excited to let you know that several of my legislative priorities made their way to the governor's desk, and I want to share those with you. The first was the parole and parole board changes, and I'm very thankful to Representative Chandler, who leads the House Judiciary Committee, for giving this a really fair hearing and listening to this bill and agreeing that changes need to be made. What this bill does is it addresses several critical gaps in the current system, including protecting the political independence of the parole board, clarifying reimbursement for parole board member service, and ensuring more considerate scheduling for hearings. So you don't want to do it on the person's death anniversary, or you don't want to do it on their birthday. You want to make sure that we're really respectful to the victim and the victim's family. I ran a bill for the Santa Cruz and La Cañada land grant, and what that does is it would add this land grant that was established in the 1860s to be an official political subdivision of the state, which means they then could apply for state funding, and any representative or senator could assist them with capital outlay. Thanks to Alan, who's here with Sala, I ran the independent theater beer and wine license bill. And so what this bill does is it would allow independent theaters owned by New Mexicans or right here in New Mexico, they're homegrown, to serve beer and wine to customers during movie screenings or other events. Alan and I worked closely along with Janice Krish of the Economic Development, who's the Economic Development Program Manager for Los Alamos Main Street, to get this bill drafted, written, and debated successfully in both chambers. And I'm happy to announce that this bill was signed into law. I worked on, my major priority was the family infant toddler funding bill. What happened is New Mexicans who are developmentally delayed and their children, their caregivers were given a raise. But unfortunately, that raise wasn't built into the budget. So their raise took effect for 2 weeks and then they pulled that raise back from them. So what this bill did is it made it into House Bill 2 where the $2.2 million to make them whole was passed. So they're gonna be able to get reimbursed for that time that the raise was pulled from them. And then we ensured that the money was now line itemed so that it would remain in their salary. So that was a big bill, that was signed into law. The administration of the local DWI grant program, that increased the appropriation of liquor excise tax revenue, and it's gonna be used to administer the local DWI grant program in every county throughout New Mexico. Now, I'm happy to report that that bill was also signed into law. Now, a fun bill was the Lowrider Capital of the World license plate bill. And to some people, they thought I wasted my time with this bill. But a community that needed a win needed this license plate bill. And so many times you'll hear me say I represent the lowrider capital of the world where we're brown, we're down, and we're low to the ground. And so what happens is students in Espanola lift their little heads a little higher when they can relate to their senator who talks about lowriding and just makes that statement. And so a lot of times these kids are defeated before they even started, right? As somebody who grew up in poverty from the valley, I was fortunate, and you've heard this story before, to have a mentor like Bill who encouraged me to go to college, to break any type of stereotype that was ultimately my doom from being raised in poverty and where I came from. So to be able to highlight the lowriding culture and to talk about how this is a win for the Espanola Valley, I was able to tell my colleagues in the Senate that this win is just the beginning. That they can see that there's so much good happening in the valley. It might seem like a trivial bill, but it means so much. And I did say, if you pass this bill, and kids in the valley see a lowrider of the world capital license plate bill, their heads are gonna be held even higher as they're cruising low. And it's the first time ever that I presented a bill in the Senate chamber where every senator, both Republican and Democrat, stood up and gave a standing ovation for a bill that's gonna bring a positive light to the Espanola Valley. Now the cool thing is I was then asked to go to Washington, D.C. last week to talk about the bill with the National Hispanic Caucus of State Legislators. They also stood and applauded and want to see how they can then help themselves on shining a positive light into Espanola. I did a confirmatory adoptions bill, which better defines the parameters needed to determining parenthood of children conceived through assisted reproductive method. This bill also was signed into law. As the only out gay male senator in New Mexico, this means a lot. So for families of same-sex partners, if they travel into Texas and let's say laws were to change and that child, they're now asking sometimes that the child's father be there. Well, that's not the case for every family, right? Blended families, that's not the case for those who get some assistance to have a child. This would protect those children that they could come back with their family intact. And then there was the community governance attorney change bill. This authorizes a tuition waiver program for law students working as community governance attorneys for land grants. Now land grants in rural New Mexico are major and were established when Spain came in, and then were respected by the Mexican government, and then are looked at by the state of New Mexico as a political subdivision. If you meet requirements and are in the statute, this puts these attorneys in a place to be able to help those in statute. The representative and I were able to give out millions of dollars to a number of capital outlay projects. I worked on funding senior programs, acequias, land grants, water infrastructure, education, public safety, and projects centered around affordable housing in Senate District 5. Now, Representative Chandler and I worked together to fund Los Alamos County and UNM Los Alamos priority projects. And so I'm gonna have to end now to go to my next one, but I want to say that we had the pleasure of welcoming Los Alamos County councilors and the management team to the Senate and the House, where certificates were read for Los Alamos County Day. We also hosted students from Los Alamos High School's Native American Culture Club and Chamisa Elementary School's Global Warming Express After School program that asked the representative and I to work and support a resolution on protecting the environment that both she and I did. And they were so happy to know that we would both vote in favor of the memorial that they wanted. In closing, I say this every chance I get. It's a pleasure working alongside Representative Chandler. She's not only a good friend of mine, she's a mentor, she's a force to be reckoned with in the legislature. She's a powerful voice, just not for our district, but for New Mexico. To sit as the chairwoman of one of the most powerful committees in the Roundhouse is amazing to be able to call the representative my friend. And Representative, I am so thankful for you
Embarrassed.
and everything that you do, not only for our county, but for New Mexico. Thanks for your friendship, it really does mean a lot. And so it's been an honor of my lifetime to represent every single one of you in the Roundhouse and out of the Roundhouse. And although I mostly say I'm round and brown and I go to the ground, I do proudly say I represent the county where discoveries were made. It's my second home, 28 years as a lab employee. Los Alamos means so much to me, and so do the people of Los Alamos, and I'm so thankful for you. I'm so thankful for your support, and I can't wait to see you again. And before I run out, I want to take a selfie, if that's okay. You can stay right there, but I have to rush to my next presentation. Sorry I couldn't answer any questions. Brianna can schedule time with any of you if you need me, but thank you so much, and Chris, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
And I always say this, but I'm just kidding. It was great seeing you. Call me never.
Me never.
Ready?
Okay.
1, 2, 3. Thank you, Los Alamos. I appreciate you so much. Off to the next one.
I didn't have to read it. That was great. He did good. Always. Philo?
As I mentioned with our severe drought situation we're in, what can you tell us about any bills related to water, environment, fire?
Yeah, I'm trying to think through, I know we passed some funding bills, to support the north in terms of some of the challenges that they are receiving, but truthfully, Philo, I can't articulate any specific bill, but let me get back to you and I'll do some research, because I know that was a topic, obviously, of some great discussion, sure.
Yeah, you mentioned that we're taking advantage of the fact that we've got an abundance of revenues from oil and gas right now to build reserves, which is a great thing to hear. The oil isn't going to last forever for a couple of reasons. Are you all looking at alternate revenue sources? And if so, what are they and what promise do they have or not?
Well, I think that, I'll be honest with you, I think it's a very big challenge, and what we need to be doing is looking at other economic development initiatives, like trying to bring manufacturing into the state, and drawing other businesses. And I will give the governor credit, she has brought in, and we have collectively, we have, Facebook is here now, we have some Amazon activities here. And we're developing AI on a big scale. One of my concerns though is, what do you need to support business? Well, you need infrastructure. So yes, we have been working these last several years on trying to develop, broadband and other internet accesses. But we also need water. And we know that AI draws a lot of water in terms of, computing activities and the like. And so one of the things that we have been looking at is how to reuse water and develop safe programs. There has been concern expressed in terms of using produced water, recycling water and the like, but we need a plan for water. Because if we're gonna wanna draw people into the state for business, we need a way to address the demands for industrial water, not just water for people to live on, which is also an issue if we're drawing people into the state. And there have been some initiatives, some of them more successful than others. So for example, a bill was passed that will allow us to look at brackish water and fund brackish water proposals. The produced water piece was pulled out of that bill. Was that the right decision? I'm not sure, but there was significant pushback at the time. And by produced water, I mean generally water that's coming out of the oil patch and how it's being reused and the like, and what can be done in that regard. But it's a big challenge in terms of drawing business here when we have some limited resources, financial resources that would support those expanded activities. But definitely there is a concerted effort to draw business into the state, and there have been some successes, I would say, in the last 5 or 6 years where the governor's been in place and we all have been attempting to be supportive. So I don't know if that answers. It's long-term economic development is very hard and slow. David?
Yeah, medical malpractice reform and interstate compacts, they didn't make it out of committee. What do you think about the future of those bills?
So the compacts many of the compacts made it out of the House. And the med-mal, I think, and I think the compacts will make it through eventually. They're fine. I get frustrated because I think they're oversold. They will do some good in terms of developing and bringing people into the state for medical services. I don't think it's a panacea, and I've just been concerned that it's been way oversold. Med-mal reform is going to be harder. I think the bill that was filed on the Senate side was much too expansive, and they need to look at ways that maybe narrow some of the issues. I thought it was too broad and too ambitious, frankly, and they should look at pieces. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this because I have been concerned about kind of the vilification of the plaintiff's bar in all of these conversations. I was a defense lawyer my whole career. Never did plaintiff's work, don't have that mindset, partly because I like security. And when you have a job at a large corporation, you're secure. When you're a plaintiff's lawyer, you cannot count on where your revenues are. There's a higher risk in terms of your practice. It's not like being a defense lawyer where you're with a big law firm and you work for companies that pay your bill regardless of what you do. So, I think we need to be mindful of the fact that we need folks who are willing to take plaintiff's cases. Why is that? Because people are injured. Malpractice is an injury to a person because some medical provider did not observe a standard of care. And we do not want to undermine the system to such a degree where there are not lawyers who are willing to take those cases. Because remember, they're expensive, they often have to upfront the costs, and the risk is they'll lose. Unlike me, who's risk averse, and it was very happy to draw a nice lab salary and pension and the like. So I think I want to be, I never was a plaintiff's lawyer, I am not plaintiff the plaintiff's bar, but I am very concerned about the kind of ever unending drumbeat against the plaintiff's bar. And so I'm just saying that from someone who has no self-interest in the outcome, other than I do believe people have a right to remedies when they have been injured by someone who acted wrongly. Now, do some controls maybe need to get put in place? I think there is punitive damages seem to be out of control. We might want to look at that as an issue, and I think maybe it would be wise for some of those in the plaintiff's bar to be looking at reasonable solutions on that front. But in terms of fees, as I said, you're taking on a risk. And I've been thinking about this as a defense attorney at the lab. What did I learn? Well, I learned when we thought we had a case that was going to create a problem. First of all, we settled it, and then we put measures in place so it wouldn't happen again. That's what the value is of litigation. And so we can all shake our heads and say it's horrible, but it drives solutions to problems. And so I was thinking back on when we first were hearing a lot about sexual harassment. Sexual harassment's not new. It's been in place in time immemorial. It was an issue. But it was around the 90s where we started seeing judgments on sexual harassment and then attorney's fees associated with those things. And you know what? We started having training programs. We started disciplining managers who were behaving incorrectly. And we don't see that kind of stuff anymore. It's not totally extinguished. It's forever present. But it caused us to be mindful of the problem. Not because we thought necessarily it was right. We knew it was an issue. But what drove us was the financial incentive to resolve the problem. So, I'm just saying that because I've been here, I read all this stuff in the newspaper, the evil plaintiffs bar, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, there are some excesses, but I think we need to be, keep some perspective here. There are also injured patients who deserve compensation. Okay, David, you didn't know what you were unleashing, but it's been on my mind a lot.
No, thank you very much.
Sure. Anyone else? Okay, you were afraid of another really long answer. That's what it is. I get it. So, okay, well, Bill.
I appreciate your work on AI. A couple questions related to that. What were there any key points that the tech firms were saying, oh, this is what your legislation is going to prevent us from doing this or this that will benefit society? What were those?
Yeah.
And the other thing is you were talking about water earlier and AI. AI, one of my biggest concerns about AI is its demand on resources.
Yeah.
We tend to think it's free. It's one of the reasons why I rarely use AI, because of its resource implications on energy, electricity, and water. And so I'm just wondering whether the state has, in the legislature, it would be useful at an interim session to have some discussions about that on the AI. And then going back to my first question,
Yeah.
what does Amazon and
Yeah.
Google, how do they push back?
Well, usually they have broad brush, scary scenarios, which, is real frustrating. But one of the things is they say, okay, this will stifle innovation. That's a great kind of buzz. This will stifle, and our response to that is, the bill explicitly says the developmental phase, none of this bill applies, meaning you don't have to do assessments. Any of the developmental stuff is free reign in terms of how you use it. This bill does not apply to that. So that was one thing. My experience with lobbyists who work for these companies are, some of them don't really even understand the bills. They just have these kind of broad brush talking points. So that was one, it stifles innovation. Oh, the bill in Colorado's a mess, so we need to wait until that plays out. It's too hard for small businesses to adhere to, and we listened to that one. Okay, so let's say you're a relatively small business that's using AI to evaluate a potential renter, let's just say that, okay. We said, okay, we get that you can't do all these assessments when you're a small landlord and you want to use it. You can rely on the developer's assessment. Just get it from them, and then you can use that. So, we are responsive. This is hard on small businesses. Okay, well, this is our response to that. The innovation thing, this is our response to that. You go down the list, but it's just very hard to talk to legislators when they're hearing all this buzz from, kind of doomsday scenarios. And I have seen that time and again on these big, complicated bills that we've worked on. There are these doomsday things that's very hard to contradict, but those were the big ones. I think your point about having a day in an interim or maybe on the Science and Technology Committee or one of those committees, even Economic Development would be a good one, where we talk about the resources that are needed to support AI would be fabulous. Because I know the lab works in AI, I'm not dissing that, but I've got Philo here who's probably wondering, what about the damn electricity that we've got to provide for that? And it also draws on a lot of water.
Both.
Both here in town. So And I hope part of the site-wide EIS is addressing that, or, you know, some of those concerns are being raised in terms of what we're looking at. Because remember, site-wide doesn't just apply to the pit production, which is what everybody's all excited about, at least in the advocacy community. There are other things that the lab's doing. Again, I fully support the lab's work, but they need to take into account what, you know, these kinds of things. And I think that's a really great suggestion, Bill, and I'll bring it up with some of the chairs that will be working the committees this year. Okay, well, it was great seeing all of you, and thank you for listening, and really appreciate your interest.